Great. Thank you, Orly. Welcome, everyone. We are super excited to have you here today. This is our webinar that's going to focus especially on compliance for controlled unclassified information and all the different things one needs to do as part of the defense industrial base or elsewhere to be compliant with the rules for controlled unclassified information, which includes the upcoming CMMC program, DFARS, and other things. We are really, really blessed to have some wonderful folks here with us today. Mrs. Stacy Bostjanick, who heads up the CMMC program in the Department of Defense, and Scott Singer from CyberNINES, and Marcy Womack from Schellman. Their companies are both authorized CMMC third-party audit organizations. And I'm Randy Batat. I'm a co-founder and CEO of PreVeil. You may know we do encrypted email, file storage, and sharing, especially for small and medium businesses, but companies of all sizes, and especially for the defense industrial base. First, maybe a quick bit of introductions. And maybe Stacy, could you just briefly, introduce yourself and your role in the DoD?
Yes, thank you. I'm Stacy Bostjanick, and I have recently increased my responsibility with DoD-CIO. I am now the Chief of DIBS Cybersecurity, meaning I'm responsible for the interaction between the department and the DIB with regard to cybersecurity. So we have some free capabilities that we offer small businesses with DC3. We have a rule that's going through right now to increase our program to allow all members of the DIB that handle controlled unclassified information to get the information sharing program and assistance that DC3 offers. We also have a strong collaboration with NSA, and they have the secure domain name offering that companies can reach out and be allowed to utilize for free. And then there's also the Small Business Programs Project Spectrum that is a very versatile program, very widespread, that can send a consultant out to your spaces and sit side saddle with a company to go through their systems and networks to see if they're ready for a CMMC type certification. And wonderful. I also have the CMMC in my portfolio as well.
A small little program of very little consequence, but we'll touch more on that in a minute. Marcy, could I get you to just talk about yourself for a little bit?
Of course. Thanks, Randy. I'm Marci Womack. I am a federal practice director here at Schellman. So we are a attestation and compliance services firm. So we're a CPA firm. Think SOC 2 and other attest work, a CMMC C3PAO, FedRAMP 3PAO, high trust assessor, PCI, you name it. That's our jam. So we're super excited to be here today and talk to everyone about CMMC and what we're seeing in the ecosystem.
So glad to have you. And Scott?
Good afternoon. Yeah, Scott Singer. I'm from CyberNINES, and we are an authorized C3PAO, and we also do quite a bit of consulting with companies trying to help them get ready for both NIST 800-171 and CMMC in the future. Hopefully not too far, Stacy. And we also, believe it or not, we get involved in supporting medical device cybersecurity, and it falls under the same basic framework of 853. And so happy to be here and look forward to speaking today.
Great. Let me start with one for Scott and Marcy, because I think this is some background that will be important as we go through the rest of the material we want to cover. And we got some audience questions that I've seen already in advance and some that may come in. But let me just start with either one of you guys. SPRS, and what's that all about? People were supposed to submit SPRS scores a while ago. What were those requirements? What what are you seeing on the ground in terms of the reality of those requirements? Just SPRS is an important background for the next couple of things we're going to talk about. So we need to set the landscape here.
So
go ahead, Scott.
So maybe Marcy, I'll talk a little bit about how it relates to the new 7024, and then you could jump in with the more general kind of SPRS. So SPRS, we'll get scolded for so many acronyms, so we have to be careful, but Supplier Performance Risk System. And that is a system that's been used by primes and contractors with the government, DoD specifically, for a number of years now for their performance against their contract. And the rule that just came out, DFARS 252-204-7024, was interesting because it actually put it out in regulation that contracting officers must actually now use that risk score that is developed out of SPRS. So I'm going to call it SPRS now because it's way easier to say than Supplier Performance Risk System. So SPRS. So SPRS is a great tool for contracting officers to help them assess risk. And what's unique about it related to cybersecurity and CMMC is that currently defense contractors must post a score in SPRS. And that score gives a relative performance that they're, where they sit against the NIST 800-171 standard or framework, sorry. But that said, the contracting officers, it's important to have a decent SPRS score because contracting officers can use that score as a differentiator as to whether you're going to get a contract or not get a contract. So I'll turn it over to Marcy to maybe add a little bit more from her perspective.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I certainly agree with all of that. And currently, there are a couple of different ways that an organization could derive their score that they enter. That could be with a self-assessment, like a basic assessment, which is referenced in DFARS 7019. They could undergo a DIPCAC high or medium assurance assessment. They could use a third party to perform a third party assessment from which they can support the score that's entered. So a couple of different ways to arrive at that scoring, but to Scott's point, it could be, a market differentiator in terms of, putting yourself up next to potential competition.
Stacy, you want to add anything to that or reference any linkage or not, or relevance to upcoming CMMC?
So I think right now with the 7024 clause that just came out that I think people are beginning to become aware of, that brings the different components within the SPRS database to bear to allow the contracting officer to be a differentiator in a best value competition. When CMMC comes into play, the differentiator will be you will need to have a score prior to garnering award. Today, the new 7024 clause and the existing things are differentiators during competition, but they don't preclude you from getting an award. You have to have that score in the database that you give yourself to get an award, but you don't have to have that third-party certification. CMMC will bring to bear the third-party certification, which is that validation that the NIST 800-171 requirements have been put in place and are being complied with, right? So, a lot of times people get concerned or upset because they say CMMC is expensive, but that's really not the case. It's not CMMC that's expensive. It's the implementation of those NIST 800-171 standards that were supposed to have been complied with since starting in 2013, and then the rule became definitive in 2017 that if you handle controlled unclassified information, when you sign that contract with the 7012 clause in it, you are saying you're going to comply with those requirements.
So let's just stitch a couple of these things together here. You mentioned controlled unclassified information. Got to comply with NIST 800-171 and all the controls associated with that, and connect the dots also to DFARS 7012 just a little bit further. What's in that's important for contractors to know about that is inside NIST 800-171 or external to NIST 800-171? What do people need to know about in terms of DFARS as it relates to NIST 800-171?
Well, so the 7012 clause has several components, right? Now, the 7012 clause says you need to have a system security plan. It also says that you need to have a plan of actions and milestones if you don't meet any of the current requirements, right? And so the one thing it doesn't say is you need to burn these down by a certain point in time, which is one of the problems, right? So we did have companies that were compliant because they have a system security plan, but then they have a POAM for all 110 requirements and they never burn any of them off. And so therefore it's not getting us to the compliance that we need. The 7012 clause also has a component where you need to do incident reporting, right? If you have an incident on one of the programs that handles controlled and classified information, there's a MER report that you need to put into DC3 within 72 hours. Now, this is not to ding a company. It's not a negative thing. It's for the department to be able to understand the implications to the program and to help those companies mitigate that breach, right? We've got to figure out how to help these companies recover, right? If you look at the NIST framework today, it's like identify, protect, detect, recover, right? There are 5 different components of it, and those are all part of it. Is if you report your incident to us, then we can assist you in the remediation, the getting the bad guys out of your systems, those kinds of things. It's extremely important that people read those clauses and pay attention to what the requirements are. And we need to be able to do a damage assessment against those.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, I think also what's important is when one looks at one's total system infrastructure, including external, service providers and so forth, they need to sign up as well to those incident reporting requirements. If something bad happens, the feds need to be able to look end to end as what's going on and help remediate and so forth. So it's important not just for one's own internal environment, but systems that external systems one's counting on.
Right. And to that end, we are in the midst of another rule, right? My life is rulemaking, I swear. I didn't know when I grew up that that's what I wanted to be, was a rulemaking person, but I find myself in that situation. So the DC3 and the DIB Ops program has a rule going through right now that hopefully will be published and ready to go by the end of May or June. And that is a rule that expands the DC3 program for information sharing, threat information sharing, that it will now expand to all DIB partners that handle controlled unclassified information. So keep your eyes peeled for that rule. And as soon as it goes into effect, sign those partnering agreements so you can get in and get the most up-to-date incident reporting and threat information that we can provide.
Marcy, any kind of commentary on what you've seen, because you're an assessor, right? You've seen a lot of stuff. What do you see in terms of when you look at these kind of initial SPRS scores versus what you're assessing, and any important things to glean for others to learn from that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that one of the trickiest parts to an organization determining their score is how they actually go about doing that. So we always encourage folks to use 800-171 or use the CMMC assessment guide. They're very similar. And the difference is that there are 320 assessment objectives that an assessor is going to come in and look at, whereas those tie to 110 controls. So you can see that there are some big extrapolations that can happen when we start kind of digging into those objectives. And a lot of times those may be findings or deviations that an assessor coming in may identify that an organization may not identify themselves if they're not actually looking at the granularity of those assessment objectives. Where we are seeing that orgs their scores are here, and our results are not quite up to that standard or that par. So I know, Scott, you've experienced similar, and I know that the DIBCAC team and some of their information sharing, that's what they have been reporting from seeing in the field as well, where the scores that they find at the end of the assessment don't necessarily correlate to the scores that were entered in SPRS, and they're significantly lower.
Hey, Scott. So what do you do? I'm not me, PreVeil. I'm a guy with a company that has a terrible SPRS score, And so where do I start? How do I get better? What would you recommend to me, the guy with the bad SPRS score?
Well, first of all, I would start right away. The DoD does have a number of resources that they have available. But however, one of the biggest places to start, I feel, is to go out to the Cyber AB, take a look, see who is listed out there. They've done some vetting on companies. There's a lot of companies out there that are not that reputable, but there are a lot that are. Cyber AB is helping ensure that those companies that they put up on the marketplace there are reputable. The companies that are the authorized C3PAOs, some of them do consulting on that do consulting to help you get prepared, and others are just going to be doing assessments. Those companies have gone through a DIBCAC assessment and understand a perspective on how to pass those assessments and what you need to be compliant. There's a lot of really good registered practitioner organizations out there that can help do that consulting and help companies get compliant. But the bottom line is, even though the DoD has been nice enough to give us a little more time to get ready, we're supposed to have been ready a long time ago. So let's get started.
So the supposed to have been ready a long time ago is NIST 800-171, as we've been discussing.
It goes, sorry, Randy, it even goes back further.
Sorry.
Before that, it goes back to like 2013 even. So, but anyway, sorry to interrupt.
No, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to switch from looking backward to looking forward and CMMC. So Stacy, talk about what's different with CMMC versus what you've been talking about so far, the current controls for for CUI.
Well, the difference in CMMC is it's an ability to come in and validate, right? The whole impetus behind CMMC was a validation program that the controls were put in place and complied with as was required under the 7012 clause. So the big differentiator, I guess, with CMMC is that there will be a requirement in solicitations where it will have an identification that there will be CUI in the contract, and the prescribed level of protection will be in your solicitation. So companies will know when they look at a solicitation what the requirement is. Now, the one thing that you want to make sure of is, one, you don't miss out on an opportunity because you have waited and not gotten in front of the compliance issue, right? The one thing we know about the CMMC rule, they tell me we're getting to the point where I can't talk about the rule, what's in the rule, but they didn't say I couldn't talk about what's not in the rule. So what's not in the rule are any changes to the compliance, right? We are not going to deviate from the NIST 800-171. That was part of what we did when we revised the program, right? Initially, CMMC 1.0 had an extra 20 requirements, and we stripped those out because we heard people when they made comments on the initial 48 CFR rule that it was too hard and that they were struggling. So we said, you know what, we're not going to implement anything new in CMMC. We're going to stick to with the basics where we are, the basic cyber hygiene. But CMMC is just the validation that you have done what you've already said you were going to do.
Yep. That's I think that's a really good point, because I've heard that a lot from some of our customers. Hey, I need to wait. I don't want to start now because they could change it and I'm implementing the wrong things. I even heard the CIO of the DoD, John Sherman, say this in his testimony to the Senate last week. He said, look, we listened, he said, yeah, it's taking us a little longer than we wanted, but we want to make sure we do it right. And we listened to industry. We simplified it 3 levels from 5, but most importantly, we kept it consistent with the existing NIST standard. And we're very focused on this whole thing. So Stacy, what do you want people on this webinar to know about, sort of CMMC, the rulemaking process, next steps, or whatever? What do you want people to, what do you want people to know?
Well, I've got so much I want them to know, but the main thing that, CMMC is coming. It's not going to go away. The waiting is not going to make the pain any less. And, you know, by complying with the NIST 800-171, which is just the basics, guys. It's not the creme de la creme protection that's going to protect you from everything. It's going to protect you from the basic hacker, right? And, you know, the one thing is implementing those standards not only protects my data and meets your requirement for the DoD, it also protects you, right? It protects your companies from some of the lower level hackers. And I don't know, you know, I don't think it's been publicized as much as it could have been, but we've been having problems with people's cage codes, right? There are hackers out there that have been getting in, getting your account information and redirecting the DoD or government payments to contractors. I met a guy down in South Carolina, he lost $40,000. And the problem is, you know, so he reaches out to the government and says, hey, where's my payment? Where's my money? And they said, we paid you. And he says, no, you didn't. And they were like, yeah, we did. When they went back and looked, sure enough, somebody hacked in, changed the account information on in his profile, and it went to their bank account. Well, you know, the government, we count our pennies out to the nth degree. So there's not another $40,000 laying around anywhere to make this guy whole, to bring him back to where he pay him for the work he did. And so then what is his recourse? Well, he could go to DOJ, but what's DOJ going to say? Well, that's kind of low dollar value for us. We don't have the resources to go after these guys. Okay, well, then you get insurance to cover you, right? Well, you're not certified. You haven't implemented any of the requirements that would protect you against this. So your claim is declined and you're out your $40,000 and you got to figure it out. So there are so many benefits to getting on top of your cybersecurity, you know, and this is for the protection of our livelihood, our lifestyle, and our nation, right? We're not doing this just to be difficult. We're not trying to put companies in a hurt locker. It's not to weed out the weak ones. That's none of that. We are very much dedicated to making sure that we continue to get the small business and innovation that is derived from that. And it's a very important part of our development of new weapon systems and capabilities to get at the new innovative small companies. So we're dedicated to working with you, but you've got the nation writ large has to understand and realize that these people are coming for us and they're getting at us in every direction possible. They're getting into our personal information and finding that out to use it against us, our business information to take away our money and our livelihoods. We need to be on top of this and protecting ourselves. Don't wait. Get out on top of it today. And the sooner you get it done, the sooner you can wave your certification flag and make sure that you can participate in all contracts with the DoD. And you know, there is a FAR rule that's going to be coming out that implements the 800-171 and the 800-172, and it's going to go across all of federal government. So we're working with the Federal CISO Council today to try to make sure that we're consistent across all of the federal government, how we view those 110 controls. So we're not going to be onerous on the industry partners, but it's coming across of all federal government. You might as well get out in front of it and be one of the first.
Thank you for that. That was actually a question that had come up from the audience is, can you, talk about applicability across, outside the DoD, across the federal government. So let's descend a couple of levels into more detail. Marcy, talk a little bit about, what the assessment process is like for a small or medium-sized business. How does that work?
Yeah, so a lot of this is dependent on the assessment type. So we are an authorized C3PAO that does assessment only. So we don't do any advisory work or consulting work. So we can come in and we can perform a gap assessment or a full compliance assessment. This could be against CMMC. We could do a compliance assessment against NIST 800-171, standards the same. And then additionally, like joint surveillance, which has been kind of a hot topic of late. Typically, I would say the most important early factor is scoping. So really understanding what is in scope, what is out of scope, particularly as it deals with external service providers. So we find that a lot of small and medium-sized organizations really rely on managed service providers or rely on cloud service providers, and that can kind of muddy the waters in terms of shared responsibility, in terms of kind of FedRAMP equivalency, which is a term that gets thrown around a lot and is referenced in DFARS 7012 and DFARS 7010. So those are really big milestones and that we want to make sure that we have in place and confirmed prior to even like getting into the assessment. The assessment phases can vary, but again, we follow 171A, or we follow the CMMC assessment guide. And so I call it an open book test. Like, you know what we're going to ask because the objectives are there. So there really should be no surprises. There are a few hangups that we often run across in assessment. A lot of those are around cryptography, specifically FIPS validated cryptography, which we could do like a whole separate webinar on. So I will spare everyone the details, but that is an aspect. And then when we get into joint surveillance, I just want to call out like the DoD assessment methodology is fairly important there. So there are some kind of caveats that organizations, if they have some like a deficiency or a requirement that's not met, there may be kind of a caveat to that called a temporary deficiency or an isolated enduring exception. So a lot going on and a lot of considerations, but it is an open book test. So we should come in, ask you questions they're expecting. We should be able to point to an objective and say, this is why we're asking, and this is the requirement that it relates back to.
Very quickly, what's joint surveillance?
Joint surveillance. This is what I'm calling pseudo CMMC, and I know I'm going to get quoted on that and probably regret it. But this is a sanctioned assessment program by the Cyber AB and DCMA DIPCAC team. So a C3PAO and DoD and DCMA go in to perform a DIPCAC high of an organization. They need to have an SPRS score entered. They need to have an active contract, and we perform an NIST 171 assessment. The DoD team is then going to perform assessment of clauses C through G of DFARS 7012, and then we come together at the end, issue a report, and that goes to the organization, and then the organization shares that with DoD to arrive at the DIPCAC high score. So that is joint surveillance. It's kind of a stepping stone to getting to CMMC in terms of organizations that are really big high achievers, or maybe they've had a DIPCAC high assessment that is up for renewal. Maybe they had it done in 2019 or 2020, and they want to kind of continue that process and do that through the joint surveillance assessment.
Stacy, I'm sensing you would like to weigh in a little bit on the benefits of the joint surveillance program.
Well, there are. And, the joint surveillance program has given us a lot of benefits. It's given the C3PAOs an opportunity to work and get into the space and make sure that, we're all in lockstep on our assessment. So it's kind of been a great proving ground for how we're going to roll CMMC out. It's given a lot of the companies that would like to have a SPRS score that couldn't before get a SPRS score in the system. The one complaint, I think we've probably done about 20 of these, and nobody has complained about the process. Everybody's extremely happy with it. The only complaint I've heard is getting in line to get the assessment is taking too long. And we're getting more DIPCAC assessors to make sure we can do those ride-alongs and make the process more effective. And it's just like, I think, when we started the whole DIPCAC assessment, right? The first couple of DIPCAC assessments were kind of clunky, took longer than anybody wanted. And then by the third or fourth one, we were down to within a week. We had our processes and procedures down. So this has given us an awesome opportunity. They're really running smoothly. And I would highly suggest any company that's ready, that thinks they can get, meet all of the requirements, or at least, 95% of them, I'd get out there and I'd make my deal with my C3PAO and I'd get ahead of it.
And there's a benefit too, right? Other than
Yes.
just getting a gold star. So touch on that.
So the one thing now, I have to caveat this because it is our intent, right? If somebody throws a fit about this during rulemaking, which I don't know why anybody would, but if they do, then we might have to reconsider it. But what our intent is if you go out and get a joint surveillance certification today, when the rule comes a thing and it's real, then your certification will be good for another 3 years after that, provided you've made those annual affirmations. And those annual affirmations are made by somebody in the C-suite, because one of the other complaints that we've heard is that senior members of a company are a little bit unfamiliar with the IT of their company. They don't pay attention to it as much as we would like them to. And so now this is something to bring it into their purview. So all the IT people working in companies out there, you're welcome, because the big complaint we heard from them is, you know, we think we need to implement all these things, but our leadership doesn't want to spend the money on it. Having them recognize and do that annual affirmation brings forefront to their mind, so they can make sure that they start tracking it and understand what they're signing up to.
Excellent. Scott, let me turn to you for a second here. So we touched on assessment, and I know your firm not only does assessment, you also do advisory. So touch on that. What's that all about? You know, it's probably, I'm guessing this is a little bit like learning to swim. You may not want to be self-taught. You know, it's helpful to have somebody with some swimming experience before you jump into the deep end. But you know, what's the nuts and bolts of that? What does that look and feel like? How do you get started? How long does it take? You know, how does all that work?
Well, it's not possible to get compliant in 3 or 4 days like you see out there every once in a while in an ad someplace. So let's just put that out there. However, the way we approach it is and we're talking on the advisory consulting side. Again, we felt it's really important to be a C3PAO, you know, a company that's gone through this process and that's been assessed, that really knows, you know, what's going to happen there as far as how to just assess a control and a practice. So we start with a basic assessment. And we come in and we help companies, and believe it or not, there's just, you know, luckily the primes are pushing down compliance through, you know, the 70-19, 70-20 requirements. And that's helped build awareness and build requirements and demand for this, our services. That's created a lot of work around these basic assessments. Just get them compliant today, okay? So we go in, we don't judge, we help them get compliant today. As Stacy had pointed out, we make sure they have a system security plan. We make sure they have a plan of actions and milestones. We make sure that that they have a digital medium level of assurance digital certificate, because it takes longer than 72 hours to get that digital certificate. And so to be really compliant, you better have it before you actually do have a breach, because that's the reporting requirement. Then we help them post a score. We help them even get figured out, sometimes even with sam.gov. They haven't gotten that far. So we help them get plugged into there. And then we help them with the procurement integrated enterprise environment. Did I say that right, Stacy? I don't know. We call it PIE. Yep. And so PIEE. So we help them with that. And then we help them get their SPRS scores posted. Then we get into this process called the journey. And honestly, when most of our clients are in that minus 110 average score, and now we really look at taking about a year to get them all the way through the whole process and fully compliant. And that's probably, you know, that's it at a 50,000 foot level.
I think that's helpful. There are a lot of questions that come up that relate to cost. And everybody, you know, has concerns about that. And of course, this is not a zero cost activity. It has value. But Stacy, when very early on, you touched on a number of programs for small and medium-sized businesses that could be helpful along the whole journey. Would you mind just kind of, you rattled them off really quickly, maybe just a little bit slower? What are some of the things you want people to be aware of and stuff like that? Because I think that's important here too. Yes,
well, there are a couple things. So the easy button today is Project Spectrum, and that's through a company called Echelon. They are being contracted with from the Office of Small Business Programs in DoD, and they support all small and medium businesses. And in fact, she's going to hate me, but the program manager's name is Melinda Woods. Reach out to her directly and she'll get you vectored where you need to go. DC3, they have a program where they can walk through a checklist of the 800-171, talk you through it, work with you on it. They're also doing some vulnerability scanning. Now that one's going to be more predicated on when the rule comes out, how many people they're allowed to reach out to. Then we are working closely with the NSA Cyber Collaboration Center. And they've got some secure domain name server kind of functions that they do. I think the easiest button, and one of the reasons we put together a sheet of all our offerings, there are like 17 of them, but they each are kind of caveated with like DC3. Right now, it's only cleared defense contractors. So we're trying to simplify it and make sure that it's something that is easily understood. And we are going to post that on the CIO website as soon as we get approval from our leadership to do that. So companies can easily find where they can go for what help. But I would also say, once that rule gets approved and is out there, sign up, do those partner framework agreements with DC3 so you can get the threat intel that you need to make sure you're aware of what's going on.
Excellent. Some other questions that have come up from the audience here. We have a number of participants who are in companies outside the US. Some of them may be familiar with their own local regions, cyber requirements, but and there's a question about how that may relate to what's going on in CMMC or NIST or whatever, as well as to what extent do all the requirements we're talking about here apply to non-US companies that are part of the US supply chain, if you will.
So that flows down. The 7012 clause is a flow down requirement. So is the 7019 and 7020. Now, currently, some nations are not comfortable with their sovereign partners from their countries putting in the SPRS score themselves, and they ask that those scores be passed through the MOD, and the MOD will go in and put the scores in. So what we've done is for those countries that have sovereignty issues, where they have put out a instruction to their industry partners not to accept our clauses and to ask for a deviation. We have begun in earnest working with them to come up with a bilateral agreement where we evaluate their current program that they have in their country against the NIST 800-171. And actually, I'm very excited because one country has offered to come over here and view our assessment and invited us to go over there to view their assessment, so we can look at the different assessment methodologies to ensure that if this other country does an assessment, we can accept that. Because one thing we've heard resoundingly from our DIB partners here that do business in other countries is they've been being held accountable to the assessments for those other countries, thus putting them in a perpetual assessment mode where they feel like they've got somebody in checking underneath the hood constantly. And so they are extremely interested in us getting those bilateral agreements going. And we've been working hard to get those things started and try to come to resolution.
Great. Some participants are from research institutions. What of everything we've been talking about applies? Everything, or there are different standards, rules for cybersecurity of research institutions? I think I know the answer. But...
So it does apply, and if you are in receipt of a government contract that has a 7012 clause, you will be held responsible. There are also other activities ongoing within the department. I'm sure everyone has seen the flurry of executive orders and NSMs coming out of the White House and on the Hill, directing that we get on top of our cybersecurity. So there are going to be requirements levied for universities, UARCs, FFRDCs, research labs, all of it, because of the fact that we recognize that our cybersecurity is vulnerable and we have been getting hacked and our pertinent information is out there. I mean, the Chinese are flying an airplane that looks just like our F-35. In fact, I'm told it has the exact same cockpit flaw that ours does. So they didn't even bother to like improve upon it. They just stole it and started building it, you know. And two things, that's very scary, right? Because now, heretofore, when my son, who could be a pilot, would be in that aircraft, right, and would have had military superiority, so we didn't have to just depend on his quick reflexes and brilliance to bring himself home safely. We no longer can do that. Right now, we have to depend on the ability of that pilot to outmaneuver somebody else in the exact same airplane with the exact same fly power. When we start losing information and technology on our weapon systems, we lose our foothold and our superiority. And it won't be long before these other countries who steal the majority of our information improve upon what they've stolen. And so then not only will my son not just be going up against someone with equal capabilities, now he's going to be at even a bigger disadvantage. And I'm sorry, my daughter too. I don't mean to just call out my son, even though my daughter's like, get down and give somebody 10 push-ups. Never in her lifetime. So she'll be the research analyst, right? But to that end, as a parent of any son or daughter, I want them to be able to come home to their parents at the end of the day and their families and their children and not be in a position where they have to cling to life because we didn't give them the best and brightest that they could have. I also am very happy with my lifestyle and freedoms that I have here in this country, and I don't want that to go away. And rapidly, our adversaries are encroaching. Right? I mean, think about how much land the Chinese have even bought in the US. And they're buying up our farmland. Right? Think about it. Think about it, guys. I mean, we need to wake up and get on top of this.
Useful to put it in perspective. I'm going to jump around a little bit, taking questions that have been posted. I'm going to send maybe Marcy and then Scott, if each of you guys would comment on this. There's a number of questions about what are you, I think this is all in the category of tell me where to focus early on. You know, what are you finding are some of the most significant areas of weakness and or what are sort of related to that, maybe the long pole in the tent kinds of, you know, controls maybe I need to be paying attention to a little bit sooner rather than later because it's going to be more involved or take me more time to address it. But I figure each of you will have a perspective on that. So maybe Marcy, you go first and Scott go second.
Sure. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, a couple things, and I'm thinking of broader terms, things that may impact architecture and may require significant changes in order to actually get to a level of compliance where you need to be. So cryptography, so FIPS validated cryptography, boundary protection mechanisms. So if you think about being able to meet a lot of those SC and SI controls, those are where those fall. And if you think about boundary protection, a lot of times you may have to completely change the architecture of your system. So certainly focusing on that. And like I said, cryptography. Lastly, access paths. So really knowing how everyone is coming into your system. If you think about it as a bubble, things poking in and out, external connections, external service providers, FedRAMP, MSPs, CSPs, all of those things, but particularly for your own users, depending on how big your organization is or how complex it is. If you have, as a DIB contractor, if you have your customers accessing any of your components, thinking about those access paths and how your administrators and your everyday users access those resources, but maybe your customers as well. Because when we think about the AC and IA controls, we're going to apply them to every single access path. So we're not going to cherry pick and say, oh, we're only going to focus on this one, but oh, hey, we have this emergency access that we only use in this one instance. We're going to ask about that one too.
Scott, your perspective?
Sure. I would say a little bit is the focus obviously here is protecting CUI data, DoD data. That's what's driving this, but it's also very important to protect the company. And so being able to ensure that you're not being hit by ransomware, because if the company goes down, then they're not making parts for the DoD anymore. So that's really critical. So making sure you've got a good backup, make sure it's encrypted. That's where I would start. Then understanding scoping is a big deal. Okay, where is CUI in your business? What's the flow? Think of it more like a flow chart, right? The old school, the orders come in here. How am I getting CUI? How are the drawings coming down from a prime coming into my business? Where are they going? Am I printing them out? Are they on the shop floor? Those sorts of things. There's other laws that come into play too, whether it's State Department ITAR regulations or Commerce Department 600 series rules. Those are important too. They overlap here. The U.S. person requirements actually don't come from NIST. They come from, State Department and Commerce Department. So U.S. person rules. So those are, I'm kind of weaving around a little bit, but firewalls, VPNs, once you know where the CUI is going, then make sure that the path it's following, it meets what Marcy was talking about using encryption. It needs to be, encrypted at rest and in motion. And then start really worrying about, how do I then go through each control and mitigate things? The last thing I would say, the thing that we think is the most difficult for our small clients, is the whole process around alerting, logging, just dealing with all of that. Anytime, I always tell my folks, anytime I see the word monitor in the standard, that means I have to have a log for that, and I need to know what's happening. Okay, am I getting an alert when something bad is happening? So those are kind of just a smattering of things that we look at that I think are important.
That's good. Stacy, next one for you. It's a blunt question, but let me provide the context. Given that CMMC kind of puts teeth in a lot of things by a formal, assessment requirement, and given that the design of the thing is to have independent third-party assessors as the only way to have enough assessors to handle the size of the DIB, some people ask, will there ever be enough C3PAOs? A tongue-in-cheek question, but just maybe touch on that kind of scaling thing.
So yes, we a little bit dependent on the industry, but yes, we have projected that by 2026 we will, and we have said we're going to do a phased rollout depending on when we get approval for the rule. And we are working full time now to make sure that we have C3PAOs and assessors through the process so they are ready to roll when we need them. So we're not resting on our laurels. We're making darn sure that we do everything possible. And undoubtedly, the department is never going to be in a position, or never wants to be in a position, where anybody is disadvantaged, where they would say, oh, I was precluded from participating because I couldn't get assessed, right? That's one of the things that we're tracking to make sure that we don't have that issue. And I would say that, if a program rolls up before it gets fully implemented and says, I couldn't participate because I couldn't get assessed, then we would take a pause and look, right? Because we're not here to disadvantage anyone because they didn't have the available capability to get there right now. They just don't bother, and they call a week before the proposal's due or the contract's awarded to try to get certified. Well, that's a different matter, right? You have to do your part, we'll do our part, but we're working. My team works their buns off to make sure that we get this thing put together and put it together right.
Hey, Scott, what's the journey like to become an assessor? I'm sure you could talk all day, but maybe boil it down into a minute or two. I'm just curious, what was that like?
Well, Marcy's was harder than mine, I can tell you that. She did it when it was 130 that she had to do, and I only had to get through 110.
You're too kind.
No, it's the same process that a defense contractor has to go through, that we had to go through to get ready for our assessment. And it's not easy, but it's an open book test. Okay. I mean, we know what the answers are. Yes, there's a little bit of work around trying to figure out, how should I interpret this control? And so we've had, as a group, Marcy's organization and a number of other organizations, we've collaborated to try and help each other get ready and pass these assessments. We've kind of organically formed some organization to kind of help with that. And so it's, while we're competitors, we all have a higher mission that we're trying to ensure that, the US is cyber secure in the defense industrial base. So, yeah, back to your question, Randy, it was a lot of work, a lot of iteration. We would, I used a traceability matrix where I actually looked at every control, every assessment objective. I tried to come up with objective evidence showing that I'm meeting that requirement. I tried to push as much out of scope as I could. I didn't want to have Wi-Fi involved and things like that, nothing on mobile devices. And I could do that. That part's a little easier because I'm not a manufacturer. It's harder for manufacturers to meet some of those requirements than it would be for an assessor organization. But it's just a heavy lift, and you just got to work through it.
Yeah. Well, and do you think that the DCMA right now, I think on their website, they've listed like the top 10 things that people fail, and they've had brown bag boot camps with the different companies to try to help make sure that people are aware of what to do and how to do it. Did you find that any of the that assistance was helpful for you guys?
Stacy, don't ask a question you don't know the answer to.
Maybe I do know the answer.
I'll let Marcy answer.
So I will say that I think that list was published after we had gone through. I will tell you though that I find that list to be very valuable when we're talking to div contractors, saying, hey, like these are the pain points, because we obviously see the same ones in our assessment. And so it's like, make sure like you have good answers and make sure these are fully implemented, and be aware that these are common areas where people may have issues. And so it's certainly helpful for us to reference when we're having these types of discussions.
Just time for one or two more questions left. But I want to point out for people that are looking at this, I've seen some questions popping up regarding some topics that we've covered earlier. So we're recording this whole thing. We can give you the link, look back at it before, because a number of questions that you're raising now may have already been answered. Question, I think, for Stacy. We've talked a lot about getting to compliance. What about ongoing compliance? What are requirements for ongoing assessments?
So as we move through the ecosystem, you and I both, or the time warp continuum, however you want to characterize it, right? The requirements are not going to be static, because as soon as we find something that blocks one thing, it's going to change, right? Somebody's going to figure out a way around it. You're going to have to stay on top of it. Quantum coming in undoes a whole bunch of things and changes a bunch of things. So, but we tied ourselves to the NIST 800-171, right? CMMC is tied to that. So as the NIST 800-171 rolls, so will CMMC. And you will not see a change in CMMC before you have an opportunity to evaluate it and comment on it under the NIST standard, because it's got to change there first. But It's going to be an evolutionary, ever-building process, because as we move forward and our adversaries figure out ways around the securities we put in place, we're going to have to adjust to stay ahead of the threat.
Yep, absolutely. And just another thing to point out to everybody here, I think there have been a lot of references during this discussion to external materials available. And I'm going to volunteer us. My team's going to shoot me, but I think we should come through this and compile a list of stuff that was referred here and post it on our website, because I think that'd be really helpful to everybody. Stacy, you mentioned a few things. Marcy and Scott, you mentioned a few things as well. I can't remember them all. So don't shoot me, my team. Give us a week or two to pull that together. But I think it would be helpful for everybody if we collated all that together. It's been super, super helpful. All right. Any final thoughts before we wrap up in the next minute or two? Maybe, 30 seconds each to Marcy, then Scott, and then Stacy, you wrap it up for the final minute or two that you want people to know, that maybe I didn't ask questions or something like that.
I would just echo everything that we have said, like get going. If you haven't, don't panic. We don't want to fear monger, but like certainly hit the ground running. There are lots of well-versed organizations out there to help you get ready, help you get prepared, do implementation, come back behind and do the assessment. We are all here. We have a single goal, to Stacy's point. So certainly continue to make progress.
Scott, final words? You know what? I really don't have anything else to add. Marcy said what I would have said, so I'm good.
Great. And Stacy?
Well, I always have a lot to say. So, but I will tell you that Marcy said it perfectly, right? Don't wait. Pay attention to what's going on around you. Go ahead and start looking at your cybersecurity within your company. Make those steps. If you need help, reach out to Project Spectrum DC3 and get the help you need. We're here to assist. We're not here to hurt. But it's coming. You got to get ahead of it.
Well, fantastic. I just want to express my gratitude to the three of you for spending an hour of your precious day and a bunch more prep time than that with us. This was, in my opinion, I admit I'm biased, super, super, super helpful. I think we cut to the chase on a number of topics, issues. We couldn't address everything that people had. Apologize for that. We don't have an hour, but this is really informative, and it's great to have this body of knowledge in one place for an hour. So thank you guys so much for doing this.
You guys have a great day, and thank you so much for being patient with me.
Thanks. Orly, anything else we need to do to sign off here?
No, I'm going to just show this final slide that has the contact information for Scott and Marcy and Scott. Should you need to get in touch with Marcy, she's at Schellman.com, and you can reach out to her team at CMMC@Schellman.com. Scott Singer can be found at CyberNINES, and if you have a question for him or his team, reach out to him at inquiry@cybernines.com.
Thank you all for joining us and for our panelist participation. We'll see you next time.
Thanks a lot, guys.